One more and then a magic number. And we have number 50 in the waiting room. We'll admit that person. Hey, Nelson, is the alderman here? Has he arrived? I see the chief of staff for Ward 21.
He's 2 minutes out.
He's 2 minutes out. Hey, Tori.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Carla.
So you might begin if you want. You have your 50. I can take some notes in the meantime.
I mean, well, okay, hold on.
It's your choice.
Yeah, let's give him a couple minutes. Is everybody okay with allowing a couple more minutes for the alderman to arrive? Yes,
Sure.
no?
Yes.
Thank you very much, yes.
Yes.
Oh, the alderman is on? Okay. Hey, Nelson, can you confirm that the alderman has arrived?
Oh, he has not.
Okay, all right. We'll wait, thank you.
Patrick, the
Yes,
alderman
sir.
is on the line.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's go, everybody.
How you doing, Patrick?
Hey, Alderman. Thank you for joining us. Okay, welcome to the June 24th roundtable for Auburn Gresham. Thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. We won't hold you too long. Tonight's time is set up for about an hour to 90 minutes. This is our agenda for this evening. We're going to recap where we've been, what we've done so far, and where we're going. We're going to have an overview presentation of all the development schemes that we have come up with tonight by the Ross Barney team. And then an exciting feature that we'll have tonight, we'll have a poll reaction, and then we'll have some time for some questions and answers. Then we'll have some closing announcements and remarks, and then we'll go to some next steps. So where have we been? As you all know, this is the development team that was the sole bidder and awarded the project for the redevelopment of 838 West 79th Street. This is the Evergreen Imagine joint venture with the design team partners, Ross Barney and NIA Architects. The construction team is led by GMA Construction. We're happy. We are committed to this team. We are committed to revitalizing Auburn Gresham. But furthermore, we are also committed to working in partnership and collaboration with you, the community. So far, we have had 11 roundtables. This is number 11, 15 overall meetings, including the 3 community engagement sessions that we just had over the last 2 weeks. We feel and believe that those last 3 sessions were collaborative, informative, and we understand and know that it will help shape how we get to a transformation of this community that is so deserved in this ward, in this city, and on the South Side. So with that being said, I'm happy to turn over the presentation to the Ross Barney team for their review and sharing of what we've learned so far.
Thanks, Patrick.
I'm gonna ask everyone to please mute your phones so that we can have full attention to the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think that I've met most of you, which is very exciting to see everyone virtually here. My name is Ryan Gann. I am a designer at Ross Barney Architects, and I have the distinct pleasure of giving some highlights to what we've discussed and what we've learned over the past couple of engagement sessions. And so tonight, basically what we want to do is talk a little bit more about the process that has started long before our team was engaged, and specifically the sort of heavy and intense lift that we've done the past couple of weeks through a series of engagement sessions. And we're going to talk about what we heard. This isn't edited content. It's exactly the way that it was presented to us, whether through different collection methods. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We've sort of taken some steps in synthesizing some of the goals that we've heard, and also letting that inform some of the work that was presented last week at last Wednesday's synthesis session. So we'll go through all of those designs and sort of approaches to the site that were developed in concert and primarily by all of you, for those that were in attendance.
Yeah, sorry.
And then we'll we'll talk a little bit about aligning our emerging goals, and that'll be where the poll gets introduced. And then we will also talk a little bit about what our next steps are as the design and development team. So Patrick already gave some of the stats and figures of what has taken place so far with the 11 roundtables and 15 total meetings. The space that you see in green is kind of where we are now, right? We did this project reset after the May conversation. And really took a step back to say, okay, we really need to listen. We really need to think a little bit more critically and learn the various voices and provide the opportunity and the context to the conversations. So that's what we've spent the past couple of weeks doing, and have a little, we are here between this June and July. Beyond this and after this, and we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, we'll begin designing, hopefully. But that doesn't mean that this community engagement it stops there. It will continue on, and we'll have a couple of different formats and forums that Patrick will talk a little bit about. So the process so far, our goals as the design and development team have really been to listen critically, to empower equitable participation, to build trust, and to celebrate the opportunity to enhance the 79th Street corridor together. And through those kind of goals and those lenses, our ambition is to provide as many opportunities for different ways of engagement. So there were these series of open houses on June 8th and June 12th that were both in person and online on Zoom that we used in a couple of different questions and iteration formats, and through some large maps for those that were in attendance. An opportunity to catalog the conversations that we were having with very site-specific recommendations, but also neighborhood and ward-specific recommendations. We followed that up with a synthesis workshop at St. Sabina last Wednesday, June 16th, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the charge was for that evening and those results. But that was really now taking that information, that data that we had collected from the first two open houses, and letting it inform this next stage of design and development. And to give you a little bit more context, this is how we work as designers too. We do the same types of exercises, and what we're trying to do is provide that same process to put the design in your hands, put the architecture in your hands at this upfront stage to help really inform and drive what happens next. And obviously we're here tonight on the Zoom call for what will end this sort of intense period of community engagement, but certainly is not the last moment to continue to work together on this project. So what we heard, and what I'm going to go through is a couple of different sort of analyses that we've done from the information that's been collected through the sessions. So from those in-person and virtual open houses, there are essentially 6 themes that started to emerge. We talked about these a little bit last week for those that were at the synthesis session. And so what we did is we took all of the sticky notes that were produced both virtually and digitally and began to sort of categorize them to see what the common language, what the common thought and pulse was. Out of those, these are sort of ranked in order of these 6. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of comments about housing. About 67%, 2/3 of those were in support of some type of housing, and 33% of those were against housing. Coming in a really close second was a lot of commentary about community-centered spaces, and that's kind of giving us a clear interest in supporting and giving space for both coming together, but also space to do things. We heard that as well. Right after that, too, in a close third, were comments about transportation, and that sort of has a wide range of concerns about parking to talking about traffic and an ambition to have more walkability along 79th Street and within Auburn Gresham. Green space, spaces for respite, relaxation, and activity for children, grocery store, and businesses. Some other important themes that we certainly don't discount and are a critical part of this conversation are the pieces about retail and digging a little bit deeper into that, talking about crime and safety, preserving a sense of community, creating the vibrancy along 79th Street, things to do, and centering community themes. So what we're trying to do through this process and through this report out today is to begin to build the foundation for which we can make some critical decisions collectively. Talking a little bit more about some of these specific themes on housing, and these are snapshots of some of the Post-it notes that were collected through these exercises. And you can sort of see that there are comments that are specifically related to a, let's say, a little bit of hesitancy towards the idea of housing, and in very clear terms. I think then on the other side, you do have a little bit more of an interest in what type of housing may come. And that was what informed some of the conversations that we had at last week Wednesday's synthesis session. Talking about transportation, again, you know, this is exactly what was presented to us through this collection exercise of talking about parking and the need for parking and where and what that function brings to the livability, to the community lifestyle within Auburn Gresham, but also some aspirations of having better CTA service or divvy bike stations to increase walkability, to really amplify that this is an equitable transit-oriented development site, and to really see how those can be positive attributions to the future of Auburn Gresham. And a lot of comments centered around what goes here, what do we need, what do we actually want? And we kept these conversations and these prompts fairly vague to be able to get the range of opinions, to get the range of interest that can really then inform our next steps as the design and development team. Like I said a little bit earlier, a lot of these comments focused on community-centered spaces. We saw a lot of comments about a grocery store, business development as well. How do we improve and support small businesses and Black-owned businesses within the Auburn Gresham community? Restaurants, a place to sit down with family and friends, and retail. And how does this development begin to support similarly to other business development ventures, Black-owned businesses? And we also saw a couple of comments too about access and improved access to grocery and pharmacy. So in tandem with those open houses, we had a couple of opportunities for you know, a more data-centric survey, let's say. And what we wanted to do was mirror some of the conversations that we were having in person, provide an opportunity for those that did have access to this survey, whether it was in person, we had a couple of written versions of this, or virtually, to begin to see sort of where this shakes out. And not surprisingly, and positively, I suppose, is that this kind of falls in line with the same sort of sentiments that we saw in person. And out of the people that did respond to the survey, there are around 36 in total. 75% of them live in Auburn Gresham, which is excellent. That's giving us a pulse for who's responding to this. Age demographics, about 64% of people are 55 and older, which I found to be really interesting, but also related to the conversations that we've had in these last couple of weeks. And the most common zip code, 60620, again, shows that a lot of responses here are directly related to those that live near the development potential and also within the Auburn Gresham community. We dug a little bit deeper on this too and asked about, what mode of transportation do you typically use to get around Auburn Gresham? And it was primarily cars, 57%, bus in a close second, or maybe not close second, but in second, bicycles, no divvy users, walking, and taxi and rideshare. Sorry for the typo there for under 18. Where do you typically park at night? This also is another question to give us context to a lot of the parking comments that we've heard so far. A lot of people park in their personal garage, around 26%. Almost 50% are on the street. And 2% are in a parking lot, and 10% said that they don't own their car. About 13% then gave us another category, whether it was related to some of the ones above or if it was somewhere else that they parked. So again, this is all just to build that context and build that foundation for our understanding so that, we're in this phase of really critically listening and learning as much as we can as the design and development team and to help inform the next steps of the project. How often do you visit the 79th Street and West Southwest corridor? Based on some comments and conversations that we've certainly had, it was kind of not surprising to hear that people really don't visit the 79th Street corridor that much. Unfortunately, it seems like there isn't terribly much to do as it stands. And then when we asked if we were going to have to rank something in order of preference, we start to see the same types of themes and comments come up. Rating grocery stores as a top preference and sort of going down from there, shopping, restaurants, education, learning programs, housing, and health services. Given another set, we see there in blue, we get exercise and fitness sort of leading the pack, as well as places for gathering and socialization, going down recreation, public art, music, and relaxation. So beyond just some, let's say, hard data, we also wanted to get the vibe or the sentiment and the pulse of what's happening right now. When asked how these survey respondents would rank the corridor from 1 star needs improvement to 5 stars would highly recommend, we're at about 1.5 stars. Paired with that of asking, what's one word that best describes the corridor today, we can sort of see that these are maybe in tandem with each other. There's a couple of outliers that are maybe not negative at the face value and present certainly room for opportunity and something that hopefully we can all rally behind. You see some of them here that it's lacking, it's unsafe, it's incomplete, it's dangerous, and it's promising. Pairing those observations then with a secondary comment that was both from the survey as well as the in-person exercises, what one word would you use to describe the corridor in 10 years? Or I want Auburn Gresham to be more equitable, to grow up, to be intergenerational. We see some positive aspirations and we see a lot of commitment to what the future transformation may look like, that it's responsive, that it's development, that it's healthy, complete, beautiful, unbelievable, amazing, safe. So what we did then is we took those words, we took those themes, and we started to try to identify both in kind of the basis of what we had as the information, but also from the basis of part of the workshop from last Wednesday, which was to ask everyone to outline some themes or at least some goals for the development itself. And so we've kind of ended up here, and this is by no means an inclusive list, but we're trying to get a pulse for how do we gauge the program against this? How do we gauge the future development, both the development itself and the design? To nurture Black entrepreneurship, to attract both new businesses and new residents, to increase the walkability of 79th Street, to increase access both from a parking and mobility frame of reference, that it's safe, that it's stable, and that it's future thinking. So that's sort of all then from the 2 open houses and the digital survey sort of led us to last week Wednesday's synthesis session. And the task that we presented to those that were in attendance was to work in teams to define goals and generate 2 to 3 design approaches for the site or sites, which I'll go into in a second. And each team was given the opportunity to focus on one of those sites or multiple sites. And so they were given a site map. They were given programmatic blocks that represented a lot of the things that we had heard in Open House 1 and Open House 2, different sizes, different sort of orientations. That way we could really look in at a scale and see what fits where and not begin to talk about this in a little bit more concrete terms and less abstract. And then we also provided some of this background information that I just presented to you as sort of a precursor to help inform the conversations. And so when I said looking at 3 sites, hopefully some of you have seen this before, and this is a diagram that I borrowed from one of Commissioner Cox's presentations in May, but it was looking at site 1, which was the primary RFP site, 79th and Green Street, and also looking at 2 other city-owned sites, site 2 at 79th and Halsted, and what we're calling site 3 at 78th and Halsted. Some teams decided just to focus on site 1, and some teams decided to focus on site 2 and 3. And we sort of left it open-ended to be able to create that flexibility of a conversation about what's happening, what's the synthesis, and what's the energy that starts to take place when the Healthy Lifestyle Hub is opening and active, when this site across the street is potentially developed, as well as other sites, and what type of energy is created along the corridor. And so you played a critical role as being the architect for the evening. And with those blocks came up with about 18 different schemes. And these are all the photos of the schemes. Some of them are a little messy, some of them are a little disheveled, but they have a story to tell. And they have a narrative that we tried to capture as the facilitators at these tables to begin to say, okay, what's the baseline of what we collectively at Wednesday night, for those that were in attendance, what we collectively are looking for or are hoping and having an ambition towards what begins to happen along the corridor. And what we did then as the design team is we took those photos and we translated them into something that was a little bit clearer for us to understand and unpack a little bit. We did do a little bit of just, fact checking on sizing and stuff, but this is primarily what you presented to us. And all of these 18 ideas have value and have merit. And we'll go through a couple of different opportunities. And I'll go through a couple of themes and try to explain a little bit more of where this is going now. And again, this is all about setting this foundation to begin designing together, and also to begin sort of keeping this process moving forward, hopefully. So some of the common themes that were sort of facilitated in the discussions, but also were primarily posed as questions, were how much housing, what type of housing, how much public space, how much parking, and how much commercial. And so what we've done now is we've taken each of these and we've kind of looked at them on this spectrum. And we'll go through each of these themes and I'll explain each of them as we go too. And these aren't all of them. Obviously there aren't 18 little diagrams sitting on here, but these are sort of the range of opportunities that were ideated during last Wednesday's conversation. And the ones with dotted lines, though, I do want to be sort of clear about what these are representing. And for the options with the dashed lines, we're concerned about the financial feasibility. And our goal now is to take a critical look at those in more detail with the development team and certainly the steering committee, and make sure that those are a feasible path forward. So we've kind of already started to layer some of that information in to help us create a clear roadmap for next steps. So specifically talking a little bit about housing, the ones at the top of the page are the ones for Site 1. So that's at 79th Street and Green. And then the ones at the bottom of the page were some of the teams that ended up looking at both Site 2 and Site 3. Site 2 being 79th and Halsted, Site 3 being 78th and Halsted. And so you can see on this range that from propositions that had no housing to propositions that had housing, we're kind of in a good split in agreement on the sort of range of opportunities, I suppose. And then you can also see that some started to creep into a little bit more housing than no housing. When we started to dig a little bit deeper into collectively what type of housing we were talking about. We sort of looked at a spectrum from resident owned to rental units. And out of the teams that did begin to sort of look at what exactly they would want if there had to be housing on this site, we began to saw this type of spectrum, that there were a couple that really did focus on resident ownership and more than a handful that did focus on rental units. Again, site 1 at the top and site 2 and 3 on the bottom. Looking at public space, there were a lot of interesting conversations that centered around this too, of what is public space and how do you use public space. So you can see from this range of no public space to more public space. On the end of more public space, we saw larger spaces for maybe a park or some sort of pocket park, maybe a transitional space that could be parking and could be turned into a space for food trucks. There's sort of that layer of conversations that isn't baked into the diagram that you see in front of you, but certainly has opportunity to do that. And then on the other end, you see sort of the tighter sites, primarily that site 2 at 79th and Halsted, which is pretty tight. But there really isn't any opportunity for that type of open space, aside from the parking lot area that gives us that ratio that we're looking for. Talking about parking, there were a lot of sort of ranges of conversation, and obviously we've heard this a lot, that parking is of concern. And so on that gradient of sort of minimal parking, there were a couple of schemes that began to look at that, sort of this 1-to-1 parking ratio. And then also a lot of schemes that did do greater than 1-to-1. Site 1 on the top, that's 79th and Green Street, site 2 and 3 on the bottom. And for the ones that are dotted, the same sort of sentiment arises, that there are further conversations that need to be had with the development team about financial feasibility and the sort of mechanisms that are available for the city support. Looking then at commercial, our sort of fifth theme that began to emerge out of last Wednesday, this sort of minimal commercial. All schemes essentially had some type of commercial space, which is really encouraging. This sort of mixed use middle, and then also only commercial spaces. And out of all of these, when we look at a spectrum, we're sort of encouraged that a lot of them are sort of ending up in the middle, and that there is beginning to be some sort of conversation, or at least some discussion and dialogue that helps inform our next steps as a design team. Again, site 1 on top, and you can see a couple of little notes about a little bit more than what the diagram tells us of how that breaks down in terms of commercial, residential, and parking. And then on the bottom, you have site 2 and site 3. So I'm going to let Gabby launch us into a poll really quickly. But essentially, we're going to have a couple of questions. And what we know right now, based on all the information that we've learned, all the information that we've heard, and all of the sort of listening that we've done, that through those themes, those are kind of the tools that the development and design team has to achieve our goals. And so when we looked at those emerging goals, and the questions that we'll start to see is, how do we align those stated goals with those tools? And there'll be some questions that get you hopefully to that, and we'll be able to see where the pulse is. So there's this first one about housing. Is the quantity of housing important on the site? Yes, more housing is preferred. Greater than 30 units? Yes, but limited housing, less than 30 units, and just straight up no. The second question that's paired with that too is the type of housing important to this site. And remember, as you're answering these questions, hopefully we can keep those goals in mind, that what does, in this case, housing have to do with attracting new businesses and residents? What does housing have to do with attracting and creating better and more walkable streets, safety, stability, and future thinking? So we'll give people maybe a couple more seconds here. And for those on the phone, I do apologize that you can't participate in this poll, but thank you for tuning in.
I'm not getting the poll. Can I Can you I'm not getting the poll.
Yeah. Was there a pop-up screen that appeared? It should have just popped up automatically.
There was a pop-up screen. It went away a little bit ago.
It should still be there. I haven't closed out the poll yet, and I can see some people are still taking it. So if you might want to minimize or kind of move around your screen items a little bit, you might still see it.
Also, I see that there's a few questions in the chat about some of the questions that are being asked right now. These aren't the only two questions that will be asked. There are more questions to follow. So if you see options that you do not want to choose to answer, then do not answer this question and wait for the poll to continue. There may be questions that have options that align more with your reflections and opinions. Okay.
Just please note that all of these responses are anonymous. So, feel free to share your thoughts with us, however they may be.
This is Alderman Moore. Is there any way, Patrick, are we capturing the people through any type of attendance that's on this so that the people that are on the phone at some point can get part of this poll? How are we doing that?
Alderman, I believe we'll have their phone numbers. So, we could possibly try to follow up with them, or if they want to email dpd@cityofchicago.org, we can try to help them out.
Well, why don't we, if we have their phone numbers that's called in, why don't we get their phone numbers? And you can get them to me, get them to me, and then we can reach out to them to get their emails. Or if they don't have emails, we can get this poll to them so that they can participate. If they got on this call and they've been involved, I would hate for people not to have an opportunity to participate in this poll.
Sure. We can check in offline on a good solution for that, I think.
Here, hold it.
Gabby, do we maybe want to go to the second question? I think that we've started to taper off here.
Not here.
Yes. So do we want, it looks like I can share the results. Do you want me to do that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
We'll be able to download these too. So for that first question, is the quantity of housing important on this site? Majority, 59% said yes, but housing is preferred, less than 30 units. Is this type of housing important on the site? Is the type, sorry. And it says 73% yes, but owned housing is preferred. And so again, this isn't the last opportunity that we'll have to get this pulse. And thank you, Alderman Moore, for giving us a path forward to expand some participation. And we'll be able to download this as well. So this won't be the last time that you see this. Okay, let's go to the next one. Great. So this one is about public space. Is it important to have public space on the site? Yes, a large public space should be provided. Yes, a small public space should be provided. No.
Can you define, how are you defining public space?
That could be, I would leave that up to you. I think that it could be green space, it could be a pocket park, it could be a playground, it could be any one of those, something where you may go to relax, sit and enjoy a moment of respite. Is that helpful?
Well, it still answers more questions because it depends on what are you putting there with the public to have a public space. So
Yeah.
There's some things that are not feasible based on the space and base what you'll be building. So there seems to be not enough information to say that you could, for your definition of public space.
Sure. And I think that, you know, one of the things that I would encourage is that right now we're sort of trying to get the parameters of what begins to be developed on this site. And then what we can do is dig into a little bit more of the programmatic function. So I think these are sort of the big buckets. And then over the next, you know, couple of weeks, as we talk to the steering committee and report back to this group and those on the roundtable, we'll begin to dive into those details a little bit more.
But you're asking to give an opinion when you don't have enough information. So really what you're responding to me is it's much too vague in terms of what the possibilities are because they are significant, but we can move on.
I just like to say we need some parameters from you.
Because you're the builders.
Well, if you want parameters from us, I think the questions probably need to be more specific. Saying yes, but we want greater numbers of housing when we've already, you know, emphasized that we don't want any housing unless you're telling the team that this development is not going forward unless you guys get to do housing, then, you know, but the community has spoken and they don't want housing, but the way the questions are stated, you're picking housing regardless.
So this is Commissioner Cox. We're really just trying to take the temperature of the people in the room and who have given their time over the past weeks. And so this particular question is public space. Many of us have been on blocks where there is no public space. The whole block is built out. And that's the position that we need to understand whether that represents an ideal situation. There are other places where, you know, they have little courtyards and you see people dining outdoors. That could be a space, or there could be a green space with some trees and a place for kids to play. We just need to know whether people think that there should be public space on 79th Street. And if you don't think that there should be public space on 79th, then you say no. So it's really just a broad stroke. It has nothing to do with housing. It has to do with just public space and whether you think
we don't have a problem with the public space, Commissioner Cox.
There you go. Then you can answer.
What we do have an issue with is the housing.
Yes,
we want to make sure that you hear us.
Oh yeah, and we captured it in the sticky notes. We captured in the polling this specific question.
Well, I have been at all of the events, and when you say, or your display is saying that a lot of this is moved to the middle, that is not what I saw during the last week. So I just want to make sure that's recorded.
Yeah, no,
so
it is
clear.
You've read, we hear you, and it is recorded. What we really want to do is we want to have a conversation with this question about public space, and then we have more questions coming to address other issues. So that was a question about public space. People have opinions, yes or no. That's all we're asking.
So I want clarity. This is CJ. I just have clarity with regards to public space. So would public space be like Millennial Park where you have that bean, or would it be like Maggie Daly Park?
No.
Or the skating? No. Okay.
No,
can you please?
Unfortunately, this is more neighborhood public space. This is a place where people can gather without paying a ticket, without consuming anything where they have to pay money. It's a bench, it's a tree, it's a table, it's a place where you can linger. And we know that there are not many places like that at the neighborhood scale. What this poll is showing, I mean, you can see it for yourself, what people feel. They think that public space could be a good thing on the site. Some people think it should be a small public space. Some people think it should be a large public space. A minority of folks, 9%, don't think there should be public space. That's all we wanted to get. That's all we wanted to get out of that question.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
understand what and I certainly applaud your question, but I think whenever we talk about public space, we have to look at the demographics of the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
We have to look at the culture of the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
We have plenty of, in our neighborhood, people make their own public space in front of varying buildings. So
Right.
there are many things to be considered when
Absolutely.
we talk about a public space.
Well,
And that's why
absolutely.
I'm speaking to that it just depends on what we're talking, because a bench can be a gathering place
Yep.
for undesirable events. So that's why I'm saying we didn't have enough information when we talk about this
Sure.
definition of public space.
Yeah, no,
I
we completely, I mean, you're not even speaking code. I know exactly what you're saying, because there
Correct.
can be space that solicits positive activity, and then there's public space that can solicit negative activity. And it really boils down to how well you design it, what you surround it with. So I don't want to get stuck on it, but it's a very good conversation that you're raising. I know we have other questions. I don't know how many, but I want to make sure that we get to them all. But this is very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Cox, and for all those that make comments. Let's try to get through these last two questions really quickly, and then I'll pass it back over to Patrick so that we can have a little bit of a conversation together. So this one's specifically about parking, still getting us some of those similar sentiments of a ratio. We'll leave this open here for a couple of seconds.
Can you read the question out loud?
Yeah. Is it important to have parking on the site? Yes, parking should be provided in a ratio of at least one space per unit. That could be a residential unit or a commercial unit of space, some sort of square footage. Yes, parking should be provided, but can be less than one space per unit. Again, a unit could be a residential unit or some sort of commercial unit, or no.
There's nothing on this question that speaks to commercial space. It doesn't identify it as that. So if I wanted to say that one per unit for commercial space, that option is not here.
I think when we use the word unit, we were talking about both of those. So my apologies if that's not clear.
Well, I mean, I think that question needs to be modified to commercial space so that we know that there's a difference between commercial space and your residential space per unit.
Exactly. Several of us are actually making that comment respectfully, you know.
Exactly.
So this is David Block from Evergreen. I know my development partners are on. Maybe I feel like we're dancing around this question, and that, you know, if we're going to be straight with one another here, I think it's important that we address this issue honestly. My view as a developer is that there really is no development opportunity without housing. What we're talking about is the type of housing, the location of housing, the density of housing, which sites for that housing, and the ratio of that housing to other amenities, whether it's commercial space or public space or parking. Part of the challenge here is that you have an environment where a lot of the commercial businesses have determined, rightly or wrongly, and whether it was in response to rioting from last summer or not, that this is a market that is challenging to have a successful commercial business in. And so in some ways, to bring successful commercial businesses back to this environment, the housing needs to, in some ways, subsidize that commercial opportunity. And that is the nature of the development program that we're talking about here. The tools that we as developers have available to us are more responsive to the development of housing. If this were just going to be a straight up commercial development, we would largely be limited to the basic tools of development finance, debt and equity. And if the rents for a commercial space here are pretty low, that really limits the amount of debt that we could raise, mortgage finance to build a commercial building, which would put a lot of pressure on the need for us to bring conventional equity to the project. You probably know that equity needs a return. And the typical return on commercial equity is approaching 20%. You're not going to get 20% return on capital in an environment where rents are low and businesses don't have confidence to invest. So part of the point of this development exercise is to, in some ways, prime the pump of bringing new commercial activity back into this environment. And I think, honestly, part of the inspiration of the entire Invest Southwest program is recognizing that these commercial corridors, because all the Invest Southwest sites are on commercial corridors, but these commercial corridors need a little bit of that pump priming to spur additional commercial investment. And one thing that I said at some of the sessions that we were at is it's kind of a cliche in the development world that retail follows rooftops. And I know I've heard some things from folks who attended these sessions that say, we have enough people here already. We have enough housing here already. But if that's the case, why are businesses leaving? And so I think it is always the case that retail businesses need a certain amount of population to be successful. And that is the impetus behind the development program we're talking about. So we're not trying to be cagey about the need for housing. It is unfortunately a direct result of the kind of market conditions and the tools we have to make those market conditions work better.
I hear your response, but if businesses follow rooftops, then I would ask the question, why was Stateway Gardens and any number of other high density areas did not have a mecca of businesses? It is not always the case that rooftops is going to bring in business, because it depends on the cash flow of the residents. So when you talk about what happened on your development on Cottage Grove, it only developed after they removed all of CHA. So
that's correct. But
we were concerned because if you build it, they will come and you will have new, if you're talking about.
I think that it's important, again, for everyone to understand, again, we're not trying to be cagey here. I think I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence by trying to call something other than what it is. The primary tool that we in development use to build this housing is called the low-income housing tax credit. It's a terrible name that's been around since 1986, and we're stuck with it. It's a federal program. But the fact is that there is a difference between the housing created with this tool, LIHTC or LIHTC that we call it, and the kinds of housing, Ms. Wilson, that you're talking about at Stateway, at Oakwood Shores, at Washington Park Homes. I've worked at a number of these sites, and typically the income levels for that kind of concentrated public housing, which was the subject of the whole CHA plan for transformation over the last 25 years, the income levels there, those households typically are at or below $10,000 to $12,000 a year. And in many cases, those households operate on $5,000 or $6,000 a year. The kinds of housing that we're talking about here, the households typically are operating somewhere between $35,000 and $55,000 a year in income. So it may not reflect the income levels of the homeowners, but this is a population of working families and working individuals. In order to qualify for the units in the developments that we're talking about, the households need to show earned income. It's not enough to show TANF or something like that. You need to show that you're employed, that you have enough credit to be able to get an electric bill in your name, which if you've, been a bad tenant in the past and you've skipped out on the rent and you've skipped out on the electric bills, you won't qualify for these units. So that's the nature of what we're talking about, which is completely different than the areas of concentrated poverty that were the end result of years of CHA investment that, it took decades to undo that.
Mr. Block, I just want to say, Mr. Block, I wanted to say to you that this is the first time, and I have attended many of these meetings. This is the first time that it has been clearly put to us that this is about housing virtually only. And if we don't have housing, we don't have anything else. So you're not really asking for our ideas. You're telling us there's going to be housing. It is going to have to provide the money for the upkeep because you can't get a 20% return. And this is a housing RFP, period. We can give you a park and a bench. That's pretty much it. Yep. Because we have to have the housing. And that is very clear now. I appreciate you being so totally and completely clear because this RFP was exclusively about housing. And we've been thinking that perhaps it wasn't because no one was as clear as you have been. And I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I would also bring one other thing to your attention. Most of your surveys that you have received, the responses have been received by residents that were 65 and older. And I haven't seen a thing for us.
So if I may, this is Commissioner Cox. And with all due respect, Mr. Block didn't invent this program. Mayor Lightfoot and I invented this program. So if you want to know what it was meant to do, I'm happy to tell you. It is meant to create an opportunity for local wealth, to create locally owned shops, to give people housing options in areas that have not seen the kinds of housing options that are being offered, to create community-facing spaces on the commercial corridor. So no, this is not a housing-only program, but you're hearing the wisdom of someone who has developed, who is telling you that retail follows housing. People are looking for economic activity that says this is a healthy place to invest. We cannot communicate that to them if the commercial and retail activity you have is one business closing after another business, closing after another business. And then we're gonna say, well, we're gonna ignore the fact that all those businesses are closing. We're gonna add more businesses that will also close. So this is a strategy based on we're telling you the truth about what is possible. And the question is, do we want to do what is possible and build momentum? Or do we want to simply watch more and more services leave the neighborhood? So it's a very different strategy because we've had a lot of administrations that will tell you exactly what you want to hear. And then years later, you are still waiting for it to arrive. We said, no, we're going to be truthful to residents about what we can do to move the needle and to start to change the narrative about Black and brown communities on the South and West Side. And so that's the goal. And it does include housing, not exclusively housing, but housing is a key piece of communicating to the private sector that this is a growth area and it's going to grow inclusively. And it's going to be within the range of folks, children who want to come back to the neighborhood, who may not want to live in a single family house. They need to have options too. Starting families, young families who might want to live in an urban environment, we want to make sure that those options exist. So if we don't embrace this strategy, and quite frankly, given the information that we're seeing, both in the conversations that we've had in these workshops, folks are very willing to try this out. That's what I'm getting from the polling. That's what I'm getting from the exercises. People are willing to give this strategy the benefit of a doubt. Now, there are a minority that don't want to hear it, and we respect that voice, but that is not the majority sentiment that we are picking out after we have gone through multiple workshops. You were there. We've just presented that information to you. So that's really the spirit in which we've come to the table. This is not a trick. We are serious about this.
Commissioner Cox, with all due respect,
Before we,
I've
hold
been
on,
in all
excuse me,
these meetings.
Miss Smith, just one second. If we're going to break for a Q&A right now, that's one thing, but we still have two more, I believe, questions to finish the poll.
You know what? I don't think we're being honest about these questions.
Okay, but
Well,
hold on,
again,
Ms. Smith, please.
We have.
You know what? I respected you guys. My team, our residents came to you guys in fair dealings because we were told that you guys were going to seriously reevaluate and redo this RFP. So the residents of this area have clearly spoken that they are not interested.
Well, no, I beg to differ. There are 72. There are 72
we do not
participants.
want any rentals in this area on 79th and Hofstad.
Now, well, there are 72 people on this call, and we just took the poll.
There is no way to not say that you're okay with housing.
Mr. Commissioner Cox, I just must say this.
I saw a question that said, if housing is to happen here, which is your preference, that it be owner? That's not true. That's absolutely not true, because there are people who are fine with housing. It's what type of housing that they care about. And that's what I've heard.
Commissioner,
and so I feel, I'm sorry, but I feel that this cannot be a conversation between 2 or 3 people when there are 72 people on this call. It's just not fair that 1 or 2 people are going to dominate this conversation. We need to hear from.
There are over 300 people. There are over 300 petitions that were signed from residents that live in the area that said they don't want housing at all.
Exactly.
I would like
Are we gonna talk about the 300 plus petitions that we have signed from the people who live near this project that you all are trying to build that says that they don't want it? Or are we gonna only talk about the 72 people on the call?
I am happy to have the conversation with those 300 people. So we will organize that meeting to hear from them. But I would like to get through, out of respect for the people who have taken time this evening to go through this exercise, I would like to finish the exercise, and then we can have a conversation about whether anything should happen on 79th Street. We can have that conversation, but there's a conversation that we have prepared, and it's been built over weeks and weeks of exercises. I feel a responsibility to the folks who have taken this time to get through the exercise, because this is not the end of the conversation. This is not the end of the conversation. So we always have the option to do nothing. That is always an option. But that's what every administration before this administration decided to do. And we would like to do things differently.
Well, we would like we want a new RFP.
Well, we're not doing a new RFP. Do you realize that there are communities just like Auburn Gresham where we put out this RFP, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 developers showed up. In Auburn Gresham, we put out an RFP and 1 developer showed up.
Yes, because it included housing. The rest of them did not
No,
include housing.
no, ma'am,
Oh my
no.
God.
You can
I
speak
already
to,
read the RFP. You already seen the link. Okay. I saw
ma'am,
the link.
one developer showed up. And
Okay, well,
they are an
RFP.
excellent developer.
Let's put it out based on the actual
Ma'am,
request.
we are not putting out another RFP. We
Okay,
will
so
put
this
out
is
another
set up the
RFP.
way the city does things.
We will put out another RFP once we get through the cycle. There are 9 other communities that are waiting for their turn to have an RFP issued. And if you want to wait for 9 other communities and you want to wait a year,
We don't want no big
then
housing
we can do that.
monstrosity
But
sitting on
there are
79th Street.
communities that have welcomed this investment. And if you want us like, well, we will wait for another year to the next turn, that is an option. That truly is an option. But it's no, let's put out another RFP. We have a willing, able team. Our duty is to work with them, That's our duty.
Well, I have had my own conversations with developers who've done amazing things in Black communities. And I would like for them to be considered and have an opportunity.
And
because
if
I
you
don't
can
think
forward them to us.
Well, we didn't even know this was occurring.
If you can forward them to us, the planning department can work with them. So I will, after this call, I will get the names and we will talk. But out of respect of the process, which has taken 12 months to stand up, and you have one extremely willing developer, I feel an obligation to continue to work on this till we get it right. Now, if there are other developers who are interested, we've got tons of land, and bring them to me and we will sit and negotiate and see what their vision is and see how it works. I commit to you to do that. That's what this plan is intended to do. It's to bring private sector interest to your neighborhood. And if you have developers who are now saying they can do a great development here, the strategy is working. We have brought attention to Auburn Gresham. I welcome to work with them, but I also welcome to work with this team that has done amazing work on behalf of the residents. And I feel a sincere obligation to allow them to continue to evolve their project. So if you don't mind, I want to make sure we get through the questions, whether you like them or not, whether you choose to answer them or not, so that we can leave this meeting with some instruction on how they should move forward. So that's my recommendation. I think our conversation, it's not fair to all of these folks to have to sit and listen to this conversation. I'm happy to have this conversation offline, happy to do it. But I would like, if Ryan, if you can continue with the questions so I can make sure that we get through this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Commissioner Cox. Gabby, do you want to go to the next question? Okay, this is the last one in this series. Is it important to have commercial space on the site? Yes, 2 or more retail tenants would be preferable. Yes, but 1 or more retail tenants would be sufficient. And no. And I think all of these questions have had a no option. And similar to what Commissioner Cox just said, if you don't want to respond, we're okay with that too. Couple more seconds here. Looks like we're slowing down on responses. Okay. Want to end the poll and then we can see what these results are. So about 91% said 2 or more rental or retail tenants would be preferable. 9% said 1 or 2 would be sufficient, and no one said no. Okay, clear polls. And Gabby, is there one more question in the lineup? Please select the top two most important design elements, and this is a multiple choice question to you. And these were, again, the themes that we had gone through from the workshop last Wednesday. Housing quantity, housing type, public space, parking, and commercial space. The question is, please select the top two most important design elements. Housing quantity, housing type, public space, parking, and commercial space.
The 2 plate with the veggies.
We'll give you a couple more seconds here. We'll get up to a minute. Looks like we're almost at the same responses to the last question. Okay, let's close this one and see what the results are. Okay, housing quantity, about 16% said that that was one of their most important design elements. Housing type, we're at about 53%. Public space, 16%. Parking, almost at 50%, they're at 45%. And commercial space seems to be one of the most important design elements at 74%. And Gabby, is that the last of our questions? I forget.
There was one about the relationship to Auburn Gresham.
Yeah, let's do that one really quick. Okay, and this is our last question. Please describe your relationship to Auburn Gresham. Select all that apply. Again, this is multiple choice. I am a resident and own a home in Auburn Gresham. I am a resident and rent my home. I own a business in Auburn Gresham, and I work in the neighborhood. Again, the question is, please describe your relationship to Auburn Gresham. Select all that apply. I am a resident and own my home. I am a resident and rent my home. I own a business in Auburn Gresham, or I work in the neighborhood. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to reply, almost at the same count that we were previously. Okay, let's see these results. Excellent. 75% of you that replied are a resident and own your home. 6% are a resident and rent your home. 31% of you own businesses in Auburn Gresham, and 31% of you work in the neighborhood. Excellent. Well, thank you, Gabby, for going through those and giving us that pulse. I did just want to end really quickly too, before I hand it back over to Patrick. There's certainly a lot of conversation that's been happening and a lot for the design and development team to consider. Basically, our charge now moving forward, we hope, is that we'll use the ideas that we've created from the community engagement meetings, those ones that we saw on the spectrums with those themes, to generate and inspire a proposal that really critically uses those ideas and concepts. We're going to work with both the city and the development team to look at the goals and look at the resources and evaluate feasibility. And then we're going to have a couple of follow-up opportunities. Again, the community engagement doesn't end tonight. It doesn't end here. We'll be working with the steering committee to review and refine those propositions, and we'll be presenting these back to the roundtable and continuing, hopefully, a productive and intense dialogue and conversation. Patrick, I'm going to hand it back to you, and we can use the time remaining for any more conversations that we wish to have and updates.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Ryan. I just, Patrick, because unfortunately, I couldn't see who said that they had developers lined up and ready to invest. But is there a way that we can make sure that I have their contact information?
Yes.
I'll be contacting them tomorrow to get the names of these developers in hopes of finding a way to engage them. Because as I said, we need a lot of assistance to transform this corridor. And if there are developers lining up that I don't know about, then I need to find out. So I think this resident has some information that our department needs, and I look forward to getting that. So you can make sure I have the information. Thank
Yes, that was Desi Smith. Desi Smith, do we have your consent to provide our senior staff your contact information? I know I have your email, but if you would like to email me your phone number, that way the commissioner can contact you directly over the next course of a couple of days and have a direct conversation with you with respect to what you said that would help the community have more options for development. Do I have your consent, Ms. Smith? Okay, well, we'll give you some time to reflect on that question. We want to thank the Ross Barney design team for, and also our communication staff for putting together this poll. What we want to do is first, we want to thank everyone who chose to respond, We had up to 72 people here on this call. Not all of you had a chance to respond or chose to respond, but we thank those of you who have. As we stated, since we rebooted this process to get more engagement, feedback, and information from the community, the data that we are collecting as part of this process will help inform the development in this community take shape. So the information that we're getting is going to help inform how we move forward. So your input is very important. I see a lot of comments in the chat. A lot of different opinions, but I want you to remember that the questions in the poll were formulated from the data that was captured from your input during the workshop sessions. I want to repeat that. The poll questions were formulated based on the data that was captured from your input during the workshop sessions. Many of you have decided to submit your name to be part of the steering committee. That steering committee is part of our next steps. You folks will have a chance to provide further input into the process. There have been no decisions made here this evening. What you are witnessing is the Department of Planning alongside with the development team seeking further input, getting more data, getting more opinions. We need that to make sure that the type of developments that happen in these communities reflect the will of the community, okay? So I think before we continue, I know that there have been a number of people who have had their hand up for a long time. We want to give them some equal time here. So I'm going to go in order of the people that I see. I see Q, I see Mr. Hank Meyer, and I believe CJ, your hand has also been up. So let's go in that order before we.
Excuse me 1 second. This is Desi Smith's husband. Hello?
Yeah, hey, Mr. Smith. Okay, hold on. Can you please mute your phone, ma'am? Okay, Mr. Smith, I'll allow you a 30-second.
Desi said that's fine to pass her information along to the commissioner. She's actually on another Zoom call that started at 7.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Smith. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Q, if you have your question still, I will allow you to ask that question. Hopefully we can provide an answer for you. And then Mr. Meyer, and then CJ.
I'm sorry, I'm in a noisy environment. I won't be out of here until about 5 minutes, so I took my hand down.
Okay, thank you. Hank?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Hank Meyer. My brother and I, John Meyer, are proprietors of BJ's Market and Bakery at 79th and Racine. I wanted everyone to know that we're very committed to what's happening in Auburn and Gresham. We love that community. We've already spent north of $20,000 on architectural plans to reconfigure the store, not only to serve Auburn and Gresham, but other parts of Chicago. So we're very excited and very much in support of any kind of new and enhanced economic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Meyer.
Question now?
Yeah, I'm not done yet, ma'am. CJ had her hand up first. I don't know who you are. Please identify yourself when you have the opportunity. Miss CJ Pruitt, I'll allow you to speak. Thank you.
Yes, good evening once again and happy Friday Eve. I just wanted to make sure that we do acknowledge longtime standing residents of Auburn Gresham. When the Fair Housing Act of 1964 was passed, there was one neighborhood in which African Americans could move into, which was Inglewood, and then shortly thereafter, Auburn Gresham. So we have to acknowledge that. We have to also acknowledge the trauma that has occurred over decades. The trauma that has occurred over 40 years, almost 50 years of violence, and most of the gun violence. We have to acknowledge that, and the hesitancy of families that have been witness to that, right? And so we have to come into a space where we can acknowledge that, and then see how we can make this work for everybody. And when you because I'm gonna be real, the hesitancy for me, when I came back 22 years ago, I made an investment and decided to be a homeowner next door to where I grew up because I wanted to make a difference. And I tried my darndest. But then when you receive a paper from a son who just graduated valedictorian from his class, and he has an opportunity to go away from here because of the trauma before he was born, to see this like almost every month, you have to address that. And I think the hesitancy is when you don't own, you don't care. And so we don't want to see more tenants come and don't care and have that mindset of it's not there, so they don't care. And I think what's scaring me is 62, because to me on my block, that's 2 of my blocks stacked up. And then less than 4 blocks away, there's the original block. And I think we have to acknowledge that. And thank you so very much for yielding the floor to me, and I yield it back to you. Thank you.
And just thank you for your testimony. And we have heard you. I mean, we have heard you. I mean, that the poll validates that 62 units is too much. The workshops have validated. So we've heard you. And I think your point about the trauma, it's real. It's real. And it's taken decades to put us in this place. We have to dig our way out of it. I think we have to build our way out of it. We have to build it with residents at the table. And this has never happened before in Chicago. So we are trying to do it a different way. And the healing comes by actions, not by talking about it, not by pushing it off for a year until the crime rate goes down. It's by pushing back with our actions, by inviting the right people in with the right spirit who will listen and who will shape. So the healing, the need for healing is real. The way we heal is to take action and show people that we can create a different reality. We are not, deemed to repeat the past. And that is how we are approaching this. And so I hear you. I just want to honor your testimony. It resonates with me. And so I think we can move forward. I think we can move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. I couldn't say it better myself. There was a woman on the phone who wanted to ask a question. I'll allow you your question before we go to Ms. Holly. We understand that this question and answer period of this evening's roundtable is important and critical for us to, hear more insight from you, the community. So that woman, would you please ask your question and please identify yourself so we can, call you out properly.
Yes, my question is the fact that it's stated that you're trying to build the community up. Transitional areas has been proven to be more in high crime. Auburn Gresham has an average rate of property value being sold right now in this area of $300,000 and up. So you're saying that you're trying to attract, but I would not purchase a home where you have a multi-unit, low-income housing project at. Now, I understand that you're stating that these are the guidelines with the credit, this and that. Would that be in the beginning, and 3 or 4 years later, would that change? Where you have people that has made a 30-year commitment for a $300,000 piece of property, whereas that once it's done, it's done. So how would you address that issue?
David, are you?
Yeah, is there a developer who wants to answer that? David,
Yeah,
Tori?
I'll try to answer that question, but I also had some broader thoughts, and I wanted to come back to
David, can you also speak to our investors too for the 15 years so they understand
Sure.
that too? Thank you.
Yep. But I wanted to speak to one of the survey questions because to me it was really fascinating. It was the question about what's your connection to this neighborhood, to Auburn Gresham. And 75% of the respondents to that question were homeowners. I think it was less than 10% of the respondents were renters there. And I've heard a lot in this conversation that we're having here, and I appreciate it is a conversation, and you know there's some emotion behind these questions, but I feel like the tone is polite, and so I certainly appreciate that. That renters will come in and lower property values in the neighborhood, that there is concern that this is low-income housing, affordable housing, it's being conflated with CHA housing. So there's a lot of fear, and I think it's understandable. And actually, ma'am, to your question, I sort of had the same thought as you. I pulled up Zillow just to kind of look at what the sale prices were in the neighborhood. And you're right, it's around $300,000 to $330,000. You know, there was a young man sitting at my table at I think the session we had at St. Sabina's, and he was, I don't know, a couple of years out of high school. Maybe he had just graduated from college. I wasn't sure exactly how old he was, but I was thinking back, you know, and we all can think back when we were that age, how hard it is to come up with the down payment required for a home. And even if you're working through one of the programs, you know, typically lenders these days want you to put down 10%. Ideally, they want you to put down 20%. For most people, that's a pretty steep hill. But if you're 22, 24 years old, and houses are selling for $330,000, you know, and you don't come from a wealthy family, you can't call your rich uncle and say, hey, I'd really like to buy a house in the neighborhood where I grew up. Can you give me $30,000 for a down payment? How are you going to save and kind of climb that first rung on the financial ladder? Because that really is sort of the American dream, right? And I saw it resonate with this young man that say, hey, I'd like to have an apartment so that instead of paying $1,500 or $1,800 a month for a place, you know, wherever in Bucktown or even in Kenwood, I can have a nice apartment for, you know, $800, $900 a month, and I can save the rest of that money that I would otherwise put towards paying for a luxury apartment for my down payment to live in the community where I want to buy a house. And to me, I guess I see providing this type of housing for working families, because really that's what this is, as an important step in the whole kind of American social contract about how neighborhoods grow and how young people find their way into being part of the 75% of this conversation that are homeowners, after all. So, you know, I don't know that that's you know, too corny or putting rose-colored glasses on it, but you know, I certainly heard that from some of the conversations that I had in part of this. To the point that Fred made, you know, most multifamily housing development, luxury development, those developers build as cheaply as they possibly can, with the idea that they're going to build it, fill it up, and flip it 3 to 5 years later. You can't do that when you're building with these kinds of tools and resources. Our investors require us to make an absolute minimum commitment of 15 years. And the buildings have to be designed to last for 15 to 30 years. So in general, the construction and design standards for this type of housing are higher than they are for the typical luxury product, which are built often to cut as many corners as possible. So I just wanted to offer that perspective on some of the questions that I heard.
Okay, this still is Miss Holly. To follow up to what you stated, you're saying they're going to give a 15-year commitment to keep up the housing. What about the other 15? See, you do have rose glasses on, in my opinion, because being realistic, if a person is working and look at the fact where it's that I'm trying to do a home purchasing, you make sure that your income is at that level. You have young professionals that has moved into this neighborhood who's recently purchased homes. I know 3 or 4 of them myself, that they had to do it the American way. So it's not really addressing the fact Mr. Cox stated, that we're building up the community. No, that's stagnating the community, because now you look at people where it's that, well, I'm not going to go over there Auburn Gresham buy a home when they got a housing project up. Okay. They don't look at the details and the requirements. Hold on. As a buyer, I don't look at and find out the details and requirements. The fact that you got a 30 unit, 40 unit sitting on a corner of 79th, whereas that you're hearing gunshots and it's reported online to the citizens every 30 minutes. And now you put a housing project. Well, if they shooting and killing every other day over there now, without that, so now they finna bring stack them up on top of each other. No, I wouldn't even consider buying then. And we talk about we don't have stores in the area. It's not due to lack of residency. Now, if everybody feels so passionate about bringing Auburn Gresham up to park, let's take that $2 million and invest it in commercial. We're bringing business in, give incentives through the TIF money to give incentives for people to bring their business to the area, instead of providing a housing complex that quite a few of the residents are not in agreement with. Now, Mr. Cox also stated if we don't want housing, they can move on to 7 other communities. Personally, I think it'd be a save of time, frustration, or litigation this might end up in. So deviate that, move on, because housing is nothing.
Well, I certainly would like to hear residents say that if they can't have commercial investment only, that they want nothing. I have yet to come to a community on the south and west side that says we want nothing. We want nothing, because that's what we've had for far, far too long. And I would say, and I'm sitting here listening to you talk about renters, African-American young professionals who have jobs, saying that you don't want them in your community unless they can buy a house. Because my kids, and it may be a generational thing, they could buy a house if they wanted, but they prefer to rent. They want to rent, and those options are not widely available to them. So I'm talking about middle class, working class, Black families who send their kids off to college, and they want to come back and live in the community where their parents live, but they don't want to live in your house. They want to live in Auburn Gresham. Where are the options that we are building for them? I think we need to have more choice, more options to capture this generation of young people who want to live in Auburn Gresham, but they are not ready for a house. They want an affordable rental. They've got a job. You raise them, your neighbors raise them. They want to come back home to Auburn Gresham. We have a responsibility to hear them as well. And so I got 2 renters. My kids are renters. They may not be able to have a house for another 10 years. I want to build for them as well. So I'm just, the divide,
Can I say something as someone who grew up in Auburn Gresham?
we have 75% of the folks on this call who are homeowners. So it is clear that that is your major priority, to build more homeowners. But what we are also saying, and it's happening all across the city, we're trying to diversify the housing offerings for people at the various stages in their life. And if we want more young people in Auburn Gresham, yes, we have to make housing affordable for them. And a part of that menu is affordable rental housing, just as continuing to increase the home ownership opportunities. But there are different types of options. You can find them in many, many other communities in Chicago. We want them to have those options on the South Side as well, and on the West Side of town as well. So again, I appreciate the sentiment and I understand where it's coming from, but our job is to provide options for all types of people that make a community healthy.
At the expense of the people
Okay,
who
can
are
I
already
say
homeowners.
something? This is Q.
I'm sorry, but my
Hey, we
hand
want
has
to
been
continue.
raised, and I would like to
Yeah. Oh, who is that?
comment.
Is that Miss Holly? Is that Nakia?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes,
we're gonna
it is. And
go.
I'm sorry.
So no, that's fine. Let me reset here real quick. It's 7:37. We are past our time, but I think in the spirit of this great conversation we're having, we're getting good historical reflections about Auburn Gresham in the chat here and some great live questions. But in the interest of time, we're gonna go Miss Nakia Holly. We're gonna go back to Q. Hopefully you're in a silent area now where you can be heard. And then we're gonna close with Jasmine in focus. Dave, is your hand up for a question, or is that just from a previous iteration? Okay, so those will be the last three questions. Please keep your questions in the chat going. We are going to get a copy of this and we'll be able to respond to some of the unanswered questions in the chat, in the next week or two. And we will respond to all those who have, dropped something in the chat box, at a later time. So we're going to have these last three questions, and then I'll get to some last directions, and then we'll close our session for this evening. I think you will all agree that it's been very productive. Thank you. Ms. Holly, please.
Thank you. And as I sit here and listen to all of the points and different perspectives, one thing that I would like to say is, while I do understand, the fight for bringing in affordable housing for the young people, I understand that perspective, but you also have to look at the long-term effects, right? So not only, I understand that everyone can't purchase a home, but think about the rental value that's going to decrease by putting this type of development in our area. Where right now I can rent one of my units out, a 3-bedroom, for $1,500. I'm sure that won't be the case once this development is built. Not only that, let's think about the long-term impact. When traditionally in this area, there's 2-flat homes, right? So when someone is looking to purchase a 2-flat in this area, the first thing that the lender will say is, well, let's look at what the average market rent is in the area. That will help to possibly boost up your pre-approval amount. So I think it's a lot of different factors that come into play why us as homeowners are so hesitant and not in and it is not in support of this project. I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that we don't want young people in. I'm a young person, I'm 31, and I purchased a couple properties. But I think that what it is that putting this type of development in the location that we're trying to put it in is not going to be a positive thing for this community. I think first we need to start to tackle, and I'm glad that the alderman is actually on this call. First, we need to tackle the crime and safety. Give you an example. 2 days ago, there was a gentleman sitting on my porch and I could not get him to move. I had to call the police. It's only me and my 13-year-old daughter at home. He was sitting on my porch and I could not get him to move. I called the police. The police showed up 3 hours later. 3 hours later. So let's address some of the safety concerns first before we begin to even talk about putting more people in a community that, in my opinion, doesn't need to be there. And it doesn't have anything to do with low income or anything like that. But what I am saying is the demographic area and the type of people that you will attract.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I will tell you, that we have to do both simultaneously. We have to make Auburn Gresham safer. And we also have to get more eyes on the street. It is not safe if you are walking past parking lot, vacant lot after parking lot after vacant lot. That's what contributes to the crime and the sense of insecurity. So we can do both. We have a superintendent, a police superintendent. His job is to increase the safety. Our job is to grow in an inclusive way Auburn Gresham so that we can contribute to the safety of that community. But we can't, if the answer to our question is let's make Chicago safe, let's lower the homicide rate, and then we will develop our communities, then I think we're in a losing battle. We have to do both at the same time. It's not a choice. It's not a choice.
But it's discouraging when you're focused. It's discouraging because in the current state, right, we're focused on one and we're not successful in that. So then how can I feel confident in you saying we have to do both at the same time and we can achieve it when we have one situation that hasn't already been handled?
Well, I hear you. And I spent an hour on the phone with the police superintendent today, talking specifically about what you just brought up. It was 12 people on that call, and we came away with a set of strategies that we're deploying. We're doing this stuff. That's his specialty. Our specialty is equitable, inclusive development, and we are working in tandem with him. So I hear you. And as I said, I spent an hour today trying to address the issue that you're raising when my job is planning and development, because I care and your point is well taken. We have to do both simultaneously.
What was the alderman on that meeting? Where was the alderman?
No, it was all interior. It was 6 different departments within city government, because that's part of our job. And the alderman has been on conversations like this in another area that we have concerns with. So I hear your point. I think the hardest job in this city right now is to be the police superintendent. But our job is to make sure that we create a place where you can feel safe. And it's not keeping it as it is, it's allowing it to develop in a way that's inclusive and that's equitable. And I think that's the path that we're on. And I just so want folks to give us a chance. Give us a chance to do this right. You have never been engaged like this before. And so you have to say something feels a little different here. Something feels a little different than the last time I had this conversation 2 years ago with God knows who was the commissioner then. So I know we're trying to earn your trust. We're spending the time, we're listening. We're not coming with one size fits all, we're coming with options. Give us an opportunity to prove that this can work. That's all we're asking. That's all we're asking.
I would ask, and I certainly thank you, Commissioner, but I would certainly ask that you—
Sorry, I thought my hand was up and I was
Yeah,
next.
folks, we need to stay in order. We need to stay in order. Ms. Wilson, I thoroughly enjoy you, but it's Miss Q's turn to speak. Apology accepted. It's Miss Q's turn to speak. No, Jasmine, you're last.
Okay, yes, I'm here.
Please go ahead with your question. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well, I have, one thing is that when we're talking about safety and then we're talking about bringing these other individuals into the neighborhood, is that they shoot right there at the corner of the police station. So, I mean, we're talking about officers being more vigilant, being out more. They don't come until after everything's over anyway. And I've spoken with sergeants who tell their people, stand down until the situation's clear, then go. Okay, I was told this 2 weeks ago.
Well, what I would like to do is have a conversation with our public safety community, because you're talking to the wrong group. I think that this is a very valuable conversation. And if we need to convene a meeting to talk about public safety, then we can bring the right people to the table. Because clearly let's do that. But you know, we do planning, we do development. We try to align our strategy so that we'll make communities safer. But if you want to have a robust conversation about public safety, I will be emailing the police superintendent tonight saying that we had a conversation about planning and development. Half of it was about public safety. We need to get out there and have that conversation. And so I commit to you, I will do it. I will email him tonight saying, listen, I had a conversation in Auburn Gresham and all they wanted to talk about was crime and public safety. And if we can't fix that, it is inhibiting our ability to help and grow that community. So I will do
that meeting right away. That meeting we need to have right away.
Hello? That's exactly what I'm leading into, because with all that happening, how are we talking about bringing people in to our neighborhood and on 79th Street when 79th Street isn't even inviting? The neighborhood's not inviting. We have no pharmacy, no grocery store. So how would someone want to move somewhere where if they got a sick child, they can't even go to the corner or around the corner to get medication?
That's right.
They got to get in the vehicle and drive to get it. How is this inviting?
That's right.
How is 79th Street inviting bringing in new people?
That's
what would make them want to move
well,
over
I can
there?
tell you, if we decide to do nothing, you will continue to see the quality of life in Auburn Gresham deteriorate. That's and so that is not an option. That is
why would
simply
we have
not an
to
option.
see the quality of life deteriorate? That means if we have a problem now, that means nobody's going to address the problem if we're going to end up still deteriorating.
Well,
So that means
ma'am,
nobody's going to address the issue.
ma'am, we're coming with resources. We're coming with open ears to listen. We've had 3 meetings in as many weeks. We're clearly trying to move this community forward, and you know, I'm committed to it.
Okay, and lastly, if this goes forward and the individuals come in with this affordable housing qualifying for the $38,000 to $55,000 income, and as often as young people change jobs, how often is it that they're going to have a review to see that they still qualify? And if they don't, what's the next step after that? Is there a second tier that we don't know about yet? That, oh, well, you know, they've been living here 2 years, everything's been fine. Now they don't qualify. Now what? We'll put them in this tier? I mean, how is that going to work?
So I'll just answer that question really quickly. You're talking about people whose income goes down.
That is correct.
Yeah, so, you know, this is different. When you think of affordable housing, I think there's some confusion about this versus Section 8 housing. In what we're proposing, the rent is the rent. And if you can't pay the rent, you're going to have to leave. It's really simple. The rent is designed to be affordable for people who are in that income range. So, you know, it's the rent is sized at a certain level, but if you lose your job, you come to the landlord, to our management company and say, hey, I lost my job. Typically we'll say, hey, we'll work with you for a month or 2. But after that, if you can't pay the rent, you need to go find another place to live. The program is designed so that your income, if it goes up, you don't lose the place. So once you get in, and let's say you go over the income limit, which is sort of how what everybody's hope is. So let's say your income goes over that threshold, you can stay in that apartment until your income goes up to, I think it's 140% of the area median income. So at that point, you're probably making over $100,000. That's the only point at which, you know, we would ask you to leave if you're making too much money. But if your rent goes down or if your income goes down and you can't afford it, you've got to pay the rent just like anybody else.
Okay, so back to the question is, how often are they reevaluated?
So David,
well, you got to pay the rent every month. So,
but David, I think what she's getting to with this tax credit program, there's an annual audit that takes place on every single in the building, and so annually those rents are evaluated to make sure that those people are still within the guidelines.
That is exactly what I'm asking. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Q, for your question and follow-ups.
Thank you.
Our last question for this evening will be Miss Jasmine in focus. Thank you. Please go ahead
Hi,
with your question.
hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna make this real brief. One, thank you for the opportunity to let us address our concerns. And I'm gonna preface the conversation by saying that I have been a renter on 70 on 78th and Peoria. And as a renter, started a block club, was very vested in the community, worked closely with all the powers that be to better the community with the different things that was happening in our community with both Terry Peterson, Latasha Thomas, and current Alderman David Moore, working closely with the various police commanders and superintendents and doing the different marches to clean it up. I was on that block when we had the multi-unit building with commercial development downstairs. When we finally was able to get rid of those units, those were the things that we talked about that we wanted there at that corridor was more parking, not housing development. And yes, we did work very closely with both planning and development as well as housing when we implemented and had the streetscape project that went along the 79th Street corridor. So my question is this. In considering that we have the Healthy Hub that's coming right there at 79th and Green in the old state building, there is going to be the need for parking. Yet we tore down all of those buildings on 78th and Halsted across from the police station with the understanding that that was going to be developed up. So my question is, instead of putting this mixed use, well, you're saying affordable, I think it would be better to be mixed use versus all affordable housing, mixed use with commercial development on 78th and Halsted across from the police station, because from a planning, I'm not in planning and development, but I would think from a planning standpoint that that would be better because it would be more in line with where you have the the veteran building right there on Emerald. You have all those other things there and it would be more in sync. So my question is, why can't that RFP be moved to that location on Halsted versus right there in the midst of a residential corridor? Thank you. And I hope that question can be answered honestly for me.
Sure. So thank you for your question. And I've walked both Halsted and 79th Street multiple times. I have to say there's not much left of Halsted. It has virtually been demolished. And so my walk was accompanied by parking lot after vacant lot after parking lot. I did not even feel safe. The street is too wide. The cars go too fast. It is not the place where you're going to create an enhanced walkability the way you've seen in other communities, in other neighborhoods. And so we very purposefully chose 79th Street because we actually believe that that's a street that if we can fill up all these gaps, these holes, it would actually be a wonderful walk to come from the metro station and to be able to walk home. But it's the walkability of those two streets are like night and day. There is literally about 3 or 4 buildings left on a 4-block stretch. And quite frankly, the police department with their massive parking lot did not help. So we're just looking for a way to cluster the development so that it supports one business is supported by another. We very purposefully chose, after investing millions of dollars in the Healthy Hub, to develop the site across the street so that they can make sure that their business succeeds because there are other businesses across the street. And we've all done it, where you try to get in your favorite family restaurant and you can't get in, so you walk across the street to another restaurant, or you walk down the block. And that walkability is what we are after. So if we started with Halsted, I cannot guarantee that we will do anything that increases walkability, because the street is so incredibly hostile to pedestrians, and that's what it will be afterwards. So we're just looking from a perspective of what feels right, what feels like it can be a great main street, the way we have in our neighborhoods, and how can we support the Healthy Hub to make sure that they have a cluster of development. That's the simple reason why we think that the Holstead site is a potential site. We've had some of the visions that you saw played out, imagined a grocery store or other things on that site that might be appropriate, because people come to grocery stores primarily in their car. And so we have been open. One of the things we've learned is that it's not about one site here, the site that we marketed, it's about multiple sites. And so one of the things that have happened as a result of our engagement is we're not focused exclusively on the site that was RFP'd anymore. We've actually started to think about what other sites can contribute. So the project is actually growing as a result of our engagement. But we need a chance to huddle, digest what we've learned from this conversation, and come back to this group with some options. And it won't be the 62 unit development that you saw in the beginning, because that would be the equivalent of saying you didn't hear us. We've heard you, and we would like the time to come back with options and to weigh those options based on what we've heard. And all we're asking is let us work with you. Let us move this initiative forward. The input has been very, very helpful. We'll try to bring the right resource people to the table to address it. We don't even have the Department of Housing here. They're happy to work with homeowners to look at the opportunities that homeowners need. Public safety, we can bring them to the table. We can do all of these things simultaneously, and that's how we're gonna heal Auburn Gresham. That's how we're gonna make progress on the work. And so again, I just thank you. This has been a really robust conversation. I've heard from people who care dearly about Auburn Gresham, and we just want to continue to work with you to improve it. So just thank you for your attention and your passion and your questions. It's helping us get a clearer picture of what has to happen.
Commissioner Cox and Mr. Brutus, can I say one moment relative to what Commissioner Cox had just said? My concern is about the Healthy Hub and all of the myriad of services that they're bringing in. The traffic in terms of personnel who will be working in the Healthy Hub, the acute care center, the employees who will be working with the University of Illinois for the medical services, the social service agency that will be bringing in throngs of people for services, the restaurant, and all of the proposed things. And I'm going to assume that you and your team will closely review all of the proposed persons who are going to be working in that hub and the clientele. And at 24-hour, they're going to have the acute care. Where are these people going to park? We lived in the neighborhood when the public aid site was there, and people parked in the neighborhood, even though there was a parking lot, because people want to work. They want to park in the neighborhood because they feel it's safer. So now we're going to have people who are going to come in. Where are these employees? Where are the people who are going to be coming for services? People bring their relatives to the doctor. There are going to be services with this Bears commission, with this Chicago Bears kitchen, where they're going to have classes. The Greater Auburn Gresham will have all of the fourth floor, and they're going to have employees. Everybody's not going to be walking to work. There is a desperate need for parking.
Yes.
People who live in a development are going to have visitors. And I'm of the age, and I know the only people that kind of follow rules are old people. Young people do not follow the rules. So they're going to park on the block. How are the residents and people, not just immediately in these immediate blocks, all of the people coming in the acute care said they're going to serve about 10,000 people a year. We're going to have enough business going into the Healthy Hub. Where are the people going to park?
No, well, thank you for that. And you know, the one thing I must admit that I'm not concerned about is parking. There are more vacant parcels in the 79th and Halsted district than any place I've seen in Chicago. So if the Healthy Hub needs employee parking, which is not on their site, but maybe down the block, we will work with them to make sure that their employees are parked. All we have, unfortunately, is parking. That's and we have vacant land, which is city owned, which we would happily convert to a parking lot to offset the fact that they're going to have to accommodate more people on that site. So we hear you. We've already started talking with the Healthy Hub about where is your spillover parking. Can we negotiate a lot with you down the block that could be used for your employees? So we hear your concern about parking. It's the least of my concerns because we have so much underutilized land in this area that if we need an extra parking lot, we'll have it and then some. So, but thank you for that concern. Patrick, I think we need to let folks get on to the rest of their evening. So if you want to close us out.
I agree. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your final words. Thank you all for participating in this, what I believe was a very robust, constructive conversation. Our immediate next steps are to convene. Well, one, we're going to allow the design team to take all this input, socialize it internally, get back to the drawing board to recalculate what we've heard tonight and put it into the design schemes that will advance and progress from what you saw this evening, which was a direct reflection of the input that you all provided over the 3 engagement sessions, the workshops. We're going to convene our steering committee. Our target date for that is around July 13th. And it'll be TBD whether it'll be in Zoom or in person. There have been many comments about having an in-person meeting. We're out of COVID for the moment. For now, we reopen, so we will take that back and look at the options for having an in-person meeting with the steering committee. Also, our next roundtable will be scheduled for July 29th, and we feel that will be sufficient enough time for the steering committee to work with the design team and the Department of Planning and all of our stakeholders internally to come up with the solutions for the consumption for the presentation to the larger community. So with that being said, we thank you again for your input. Please drop your email contacts in the chat if we don't have it already, and we will do our best to respond to unanswered questions this evening. And again, thank you for your time. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.